I would like to introduce Dr. Robyn Smith. Robyn is an old friend of mine, and we met completely unrelated to what you do for a living now. We met in the world of fitness. But Robyn earned her PhD in chemical engineering, and I will ask her to explain a little bit more about that. And she's also a bodybuilder, CrossFitter, and strongfitter, and that is how we met, going on travels and doing fitness together. So tell me about your what you did your PhD on.
So yeah, my PhD is in understanding reaction kinetics for a specific, very simple chemical reaction. It's methane and oxygen forming CO2, water, carbon monoxide, and hydrogen. And it is a very simple reaction. However, it's not, the mechanism by which it happens is not very well known on a catalytic surface. So my research was running experiments using a completely unique technique for looking at chemical reactions to, figure out how the mechanism actually went. There's Lucy. So my research is, or my thesis was on reaction kinetics. I did a lot of reactor engineering as it pertains to gas solid reactions, so catalytic reactions. And I know the question coming up next is going to be, how does that lead to whiskey? And it's really funny how well it all carries over. Because, it's a whole bunch of chemistry that happens for making whiskey. I mean, there's of course like a beautiful art to it as well, but it's chemical reactions that are happening as you're aging whiskey. And the distillery that I work for in Los Angeles uses we have rapid maturation reactors, if you want to call them, to speed up the aging of spirits. Some of those are whiskeys. And so my knowledge from my PhD carries over very, very well. Because that's what's happening when you have booze sitting in a barrel, right? It's interacting with the wood and it's causing these different chemical reactions to happen. Not only is it pulling out flavors and aromas from the barrel itself, but those different compounds are interacting with one another and forming even more beautiful, even more complex flavors and aromas. Yeah.
I just love it because I remember when you were still writing your thesis when we met, and I remember at the time you're going, I don't have any idea how I'm going to get work doing this. And obviously I knew that you loved like good alcohol, and I remember that when you first told me that you had got this job, and it was like this beautiful marriage of the two. Tell me a little bit about, like, you were saying, like, obviously traditionally aging alcohol takes a really long time. Like, what is the difference in the process when you're using this like increased speed in the process in the distillery that you're working in?
Yeah, so our technology uses both heat and light to speed up the maturation process, which is very interesting. Heat is not a novel concept, right? There are distilleries. in warmer climates that their booze will just age faster because they're in warmer climates. So it's not a novel idea to use heat. Of course, it just happens to be like no one's really temperature regulating and like heating up their warehouses. But what we do is, instead of putting our booze in the barrel, we put the barrel inside the booze. Essentially, it's a broken up barrel that goes into our booze, and part of the process is heat. The heat is speeding up these different interactions that are happening with all of the molecules. Now, we also have a step where the booze and the wood sit in these glass tubes and are exposed to light, and that speeds up the wood degradation. So the extractions of all these different flavor and aroma compounds from the wood, the light helps speed that up. So our process is about a week, and it mimics what happens over about 20 years in a barrel, 15 to 20 years, depending. Again, like I said, it's a range because Jamaica rums age really, really quickly versus like in Scotland, whiskeys take a lot longer to age. But yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. It's been like a common theme when I've sort of had some conversations about whiskey in more recent times, because you got me sort of more interested in how different it can be and sort of the experience you can have with it. A lot of people seem to aren't exposed at all to like the complexities of whiskey. I have this belief that it's just like whiskey is just whiskey. Can you like speak a little bit about like that?
No, I totally understand where people are coming from. If you're not stopping to pay attention as you get a glass of whiskey, or even say you're staying in the bourbon realm, right? Or in the Scotch realm, you get a glass, you're like, yep, that tastes like what I know a whiskey should taste like. If you're not actually stopping to like pick out the different tasting notes and really appreciate it, then of course you're not going to register that. I mean, it's the same thing with like, I don't know, Jesse, like if I were to ask you to describe the different flavors of like nuts, right? If you've got like a peanut next to a pecan, next to a Brazil nut, next to an almond, if I'm going to be like, Jesse, how do these taste different? Right? You're going to be like, oh shit. Like, I don't know if I've ever sat down and done a tasting to be like, how different is this peanut from this? And, tasting them side by side. You could say that about anything, right? And whiskey does have its own characteristics that come along with it. And it's just very, very fascinating to get to sit down and have three different. So last night we did a tasting. And all the blind tastings that I do have a theme to them. And this one was very specific. It was three different Islay single malts. So scotches from the Islay region, which is this tiny little island off of Scotland. There's only 8 distilleries there, but we tasted 3 different whiskeys. They are vastly different, and they are from the same island. They are all made from 100% malted barley. They're all double distilled, and they're all matured in Scotland using, a majority of the time, it's ex-bourbon barrels, or sometimes they'll toss in and use some sherry barrels, but they're all aged pretty much the same. So the process, if you look at it, from like a top view, is all the same, but you taste all three of them, and they're widely different. And it's all the little intricacies that go into the whiskey making process. Where is your barley from? Is it from, the mainland of Scotland? Is it organic? Is it a different strain of barley? And then is it peated? Is it not peated? And then how long's your fermentation? What yeast are you using? And then distillation. How are you taking your distillation cuts? That dramatically impacts the whiskey. And then again, how it's aged. And so there's all these different steps. And when you get closer and closer and look at each one of them, you're like, oh, this is why there's so many variations for one little type of whiskey. One little class of whiskey can have so many variations in the flavor profile. And that's just one example, but it's if you take the time to sit and instead of thinking in your head, like, does this taste like a whiskey? Yes or no? And then move on. If you sit there and say like, oh, what notes am I getting in here in particular? Is this very, oak forward, or are there any chocolatey notes, or is there any smoke coming forward? Or what about caramel? What about floral notes? And then, so you kind of break it down that way where you're saying, is this sweet? Is this spicy? And then try to break those down even more, it's really just, it's sitting down and taking the time to appreciate the whiskey is where you actually realize like, oh yeah, not all whiskey tastes the same.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I love that example of nuts, because you do think, oh shit, like you could make this a process that you do with lots of things. It's almost
Right.
like a really nice sort of mindfulness presence practice if you were to really pay attention to what it is that you're experiencing when you eat or drink anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I pulled up the nut example because I swear to God, I've been stuck in traffic, LA, and was just snacking on some nuts in my car and kind of said to myself like, I don't know that I've ever, if I had like peanuts, I could be like, yeah, that's peanuts. Or if I had, pistachios, I could say, yeah, that's pistachios. But like, could I describe the differences to people? And so I sat there and I was trying to pick out the differences. It's really hard because you have in your head, like, oh yeah, it tastes like peanuts. Like everyone's had peanuts before, right? So everyone should know that. But it's a mindfulness practice, and it's trying to separate, how you're processing, like this is peanuts or this is whiskey, to now like, how would I describe this to someone who's never even heard of a peanut before, never even heard of Brazil nuts before, never even had a whiskey or any distilled spirits before? How would I describe this to them? And you can do that for anything. Yeah, exactly.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
How different is the process to actually whiskey tasting to like wine tasting?
It is, yeah. So whiskey is different because of course it's high proof, and with wine you take a full mouthful. With whiskey you do not want to take a full mouthful. You will burn your taste buds off. So, but it has very similar carryovers, right? I'm not a huge like wine fan because I love whiskey, and to me wine tastes like grape juice. But I am going to go into a wine tasting with the same mindset as if I was going into a whiskey tasting. I'm going to sit there, I'm going to try to pick out all the different notes. I'm going to nose it for a long time. So there are a lot of carryovers. You just need to know when it comes to whiskey, like the amount of alcohol that's in there is going to be like 3 times as much as what you'll find in wine. So you need to approach it a little bit more delicately. With wine, there's a whole lot of swirling. And I always tell people, try not to swirl your whiskey. That will just release a lot of the volatiles, which are mostly alcohol. And once you go in to sniff it, then you're going to singe your nose hairs. So just letting the aromas come to you. And then remember that when you take a sip, all you need is a tiny enough sip to coat your tongue. That's it. And you really want to let the sip sit on your tongue for a very, very long time. This will help mitigate the alcohol burn, right? We've all taken shots of whiskey before, shots of booze before, and that burns going down. You take a tiny sip, and as you let it sit on your tongue starts to warm up the whiskey, and that gets the alcohol vapors to volatilize off. And then you're not getting this like singeing of your esophagus, right? It's a lot more of a delicate, smooth, trip down your esophagus. So those are like the big differences in going from whiskey to wine, is making sure you realize that there's that alcohol difference there, and you need to approach it as such. But yeah, the same if you're a wine drinker and you can sit there and pick out different notes of in your wine, you could do the same for whiskey.
So cool. So the world has changed a lot in the last few months. We all got locked in our houses, and so yeah. I know the distillery has been closed since the lockdown started in LA, and you started this blog Is Neat.
Yes. Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Yeah. So that was not a really thought out thing. That was just like, I have a bunch of stuff that I can say. So like, I need to do something with my time. Why not put it out there? And at the distillery, I was giving tours on the weekend, and I loved being able to connect with people and share my knowledge, to just help others, not even help others become like whiskey nerds or booze nerds by any means, but be able to look at a glass differently, a glass of booze, and be able to appreciate it and understand all the hard work, all the art, all the science that goes into making what's in your glass, because it's so easily taken for granted, right? So yeah, I started the blog because I have so many things that I can say about whiskey, and I wanted to put it out there and make it accessible to people. And as you know, Jessie, building a website takes up a lot of time.
Yeah.
So that was a nice way for me to also keep up with if I was missing anything, or didn't have enough time because I was working, in catching up on what's going on in the whiskey world, what else is out there, what are people saying, what are people not talking about, where do I think there needs to be content, discussed. And of course, it's going to be more towards the science portion of things. But yeah, so I started that, and that also goes along with the whiskey tastings that I've been doing, which was something I just started doing on a whim, virtual tastings. And I really, really enjoy putting them together and taking people through them. Because again, it's like some of the people that join the calls are totally beginners, and have grown so much from doing the tastings. And it's really fun to see that. So
yeah, it's so great. So my friend Alex that I know from Dubai, she got her husband into one of the tastings because they live nearby now, and like he was raving about it. He had so much fun. It's one of the things that I've loved about this whole lockdown is the all these cool things that have come out of it. Like
right.
would have never started doing these virtual tastings, and now it's like you're building a little like small business around it. So you're like, how is that building the whiskey club going?
I mean, it's been going well. We just did our sixth tasting. And yeah, I mean, it's been really great. We have some people who pop in and do the tastings infrequently. Others do every single tasting. And like I said, each one is themed differently so that you can hopefully take something away from the tasting. And moving forward, it's still trying to figure out, when is it okay to start doing the tastings at my apartment, right? When is it okay to start hosting the blind tastings here? It seems like it's probably going to we're going to stick with the virtual tastings for a while because California is not doing great with COVID numbers. And yeah, moving forward, I'm trying to figure out, what the next thing is, because, so many people have like grown a lot doing the tastings. Like my dad yesterday. So my dad's done every single one of the tastings, I believe. And he's not the best, right? He's very much like, I like bourbon and I like it because it tastes like bourbon, like that's all he can tell me. And last night during the tasting, he was like, I'm getting seaweed. And I was like, I don't think you've ever even had seaweed in your life. How are you picking that up? He's like, it's what I imagine seaweed would taste like. That's what I'm tasting. And I'm like, that is amazing.
It's so great.
Yeah, I'm like, that's so great. But yeah, moving forward, it's like, so everyone's starting to pick up, their palates are like developing, and and it's great. And so I'm like, how do I now push them a little bit more? What's the next step to challenge them? So I'm kind of thinking about that right now. But yeah, it's been super wonderful to get to organize these tastings, put them together. And again, like I said, I get to like keep up to date with different distilleries. Which distilleries do I want to feature for this tasting, and why, and what's the story I'm trying to tell? And getting to put that together is really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved that you also have been supporting charities and like trying to elevate stories of like people that like need it. Can you like speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so not yesterday's tasting, but the tasting prior was a special tasting for to raise proceeds for Black Girls Code, which is based in San Francisco. They are a nonprofit that focuses on getting girls of color ages 7 to 17 into STEM fields. Which of course is like really close to my heart as a scientist, and I think it's like the coolest thing that they're doing. So yeah, I normally will put a cap on the tastings that we do to about 12 because I like to keep them pretty intimate. And this one I was like, however many people want to join, do it. And we raised just over $1,200. Yeah, and that was really, really cool. And so 2 of the 3 whiskeys that we featured were Black owned whiskeys in the US. And yeah, so it was a very, very cool tasting. In the whiskey industry, obviously, it's not that diverse. And I think that is starting to come to light with everything that's going on, and for the better, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I love that. I think it's the nice thing about this conversation now becoming such a global conversation that it's not just the lack of diversity and color. It's obvious for a long time that like women don't often have a seat at the table. So
Yes.
to now that, like, this is why I love so much what you do, and it's like such an interesting story, but there's not a lot of women that do the work that you do.
Can I tell you a fun fact? Well, I think it's a fun fact. So when I started giving tours at the distillery, first of all, I mean, yeah, as you know, I'm in the fitness industry, so blending in with other chemical engineers is not really what I do. And yeah, I don't look like your typical chemical engineer. I don't talk like your typical chemical engineer. And so I started giving tours as the research chemist at the distillery. And I got so many people after I would give my full, like, show everyone my lab, tell them all the research that I was doing in my lab, answer all these technical questions. I would get people that would come up to me after my portion of the tour and say, "So what do you do here besides give tours?" And I'm just like, "Are you kidding me?" So I ran a little experiment. I ordered glasses off of Amazon and started wearing fake glasses while I was giving my tours. And just having glasses like helped people put me in the like engineer bucket.
Wow.
It's so funny. Yeah, so for a while I was wearing glasses while giving my tours, and then when we opened up our new facility, I was like, I'm not gonna wear these. First of all, like, couldn't find the glasses, but was like, I'm not gonna wear these glasses anymore. And I had some people come in who challenged me, usually white male, come in and challenged me on, like, being first of all, a girl that drinks whiskey. Second of all, a girl that's a chemist. And it's just like, I love that I can be someone to kind of break that barrier for you a little bit, break it down a little bit. Like, yeah, we're here. So it's definitely, yeah, what Black Girls Code is doing is like, I love what they're doing so much. So yeah.
So, so if someone is starting out, they've never done any whiskey tasting before, where would you recommend they start?
So it depends on what your flavor profile would be, right? So my sister, she is not a whiskey drinker at all. She will occasionally drink wine. She prefers like White Claws, right? She's kind of like, as long as it doesn't taste like alcohol, I'm good, I'm in. But for her wedding, which is in a little over a year, her and her fiance wanted me to create a specialty spirit for them for their wedding, which is quite a challenge. And so the questions I was asking her was like, all right, what types of desserts do you like? Do you go for more light and fruity desserts, or do you go for more rich and decadent desserts? Trying to figure out kind of what spectrum she was at there. Also, a good one to ask is, Jesse, you just made some coffee, so I know you're into your coffee as well. My sister's a huge coffee snob, and so I ask, what notes do you look for in your coffee, right? You can get coffee that's very fruit forward. You could get really rich chocolatey coffee. You can have some that are bright and citrusy. So there's a whole range there. Candles is another one. What kind of candles do you go for? And that will kind of point you in the direction of what class of whiskeys you should start with. So for someone who likes very sweet, decadent, like caramely forward desserts, etc., I would point you more towards bourbon. Bourbons would be that general camp. If you like fruity, sweet, Also a little bit decadent, I would point you more towards the Speyside region of Scotland. They've got very fruit forward scotches. If you like very light, like honey and vanilla, maybe go for an Irish whiskey. Some Irish whiskeys, they tend to be lighter. If you like some funky, smoky campfire s'mores fun, then that's where I would point you to Islay, because they are known for their smoky whiskeys in Scotland. Yeah, so there, again, it depends on what you kind of like, and based on, based on like the general qualities of each different category of whiskey, you can kind of figure out where to go. People working in a liquor store should also be able to help you out with these questions. They should know, generally speaking, where to point you in the direction. If you say like, hey, I have no idea where to start, but I really like sweet, caramely things, they should be able to throw you towards bourbon, and hopefully give you even better suggestions that way. Yeah, or if you're more into like spicy, herby type spirits, then go towards a rye. That's where you'll find a lot of baking spice and a lot of herbs. But yeah, it all depends on what you like, and then figuring out kind of what the general flavor profiles for each different category are. Yeah.
That's awesome. I always get so inspired when I speak to you, just obviously not just about whiskey, but just generally. I love when we get to chat. So on that, what have you been like inspired by at the moment? Like, you've got all this time at home. Is there anything in particular that you've been like occupying your time with?
I mean, most of it has been very, very focused on writing about whiskey, learning everything I can that I don't already know about whiskey. I bought almost like 10 different whiskey books that I'm reading simultaneously. But beyond whiskey, today I just redid our balcony and planted a whole vertical garden with pallets on our balcony, and I'm going to try to keep them alive.
Nice.
So garden will also be
good luck. I put more plants during quarantine as well, and two of them died, but the rest are going strong.
Yeah, I a lot of them are succulents. So succulents are pretty notoriously hard to kill, although I have killed the occasional succulent. So hopefully those stay. Jerry and I have also, so my boyfriend and I have also been at night, instead of, I mean, of course, we're binge watching TV, but we've been taking master classes. We've been going through master classes. And so that's been really fun and really interesting. And it gives me a whole nother approach of, storytelling and how to teach someone a concept that for some seems so daunting, and how to, for me, it's a big, figuring out how to tell stories is a big thing that I'm kind of focusing on right now, because I think that's a really important part of communicating is knowing how to tell the story, how to get it to resonate with other people. So.
Yeah. And that is, especially as someone who has such deep expertise, it's how do I communicate that then to someone who, in a language that they understand, and have them care as much about the thing. And so is there like a specific person's masterclass that you really enjoyed? around that?
We did the Neil deGrasse Tyson one, and that's, you
Yeah.
know, how to communicate scientifically. So that one was really good. What was Chris Voss's called? Was it The Art of Negotiation? That one's been really interesting. That
Mm.
one was really, really cool. Yeah, that one for me like resonated the most because it is such a skill to be able to communicate with someone and negotiate in a way that they don't feel like you're trying to take advantage of them, right? Because like negotiation scenarios, that's what it feels like. It's like both sides fighting for what they want. And, you know, the way he communicates is like, you never feel like that. You never feel like he's trying to get you to turn to his side. And so that I think is really cool. I mean, such an effective way of communicating,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, think about, you know, everything that's going on right now in the US, and communicating with someone who doesn't believe the same things that you believe, right? Or thinks a different way. And I know that this has been something that has come up multiple times, for me at least. You know, my dad is conservative and grew up in the Northeast in the US, and so talking to him is a very different experience than talking to my sister, who's the same age as me and lives in New York City and is very liberal. And being able to communicate in a way where he doesn't feel like he has to be on the offensive and always trying to win the argument, right? Being able to have these communications and understanding that it's not about winning
Yeah.
the whatever the argument or the negotiation is. So that one was really great for me. I liked that one so far the best.
I will definitely check that out.
Yeah.
Have you read Nonviolent Communication?
I have not.
That is an amazing book. And essentially, it's the same concept. It's like, how do you communicate with someone so it stops being a, this is my belief, that's your belief, and it becomes just a fight. And this, the author has spent his career learning how, like, creating this method for how to communicate effectively. But he was like involved in like he's in like negotiations in like in South Africa, just like when apartheid was ending, and how do you resolve all of this trauma between these two groups that have had so much fear and hatred between them for so long. And then it all comes down to understanding how to communicate your emotion and not being like you did this which made me angry. It's actually like, I feel this way and I need this from you. And starting to learn to communicate from that, like I can see this emotional need in you, and how can I support that emotional need rather than and when you recognize that the humanity of the other person,
Right.
then it no longer becomes about like my belief versus your belief. It's like, oh, we're both humans that need things.
Right.
Yeah, it's really good book.
I will
Definitely.
put that on my list of books to read when I finish going through all the whiskey books.
Yeah. So do you have like one thing that stood out from all the whiskey books? Like, have you got like one thing that you went, oh my God, I had no idea about that?
So I'm reading one that's called Whiskey Women. And that one's been really cool because I know the science through and through. but I still love reading about it to just see what else is out there. What are some things that I maybe haven't thought of? But Whiskey Women has been really cool because that's more of the history of women in whiskey, and how women have played such a huge role, because that was, distilling was like a domestic duty, right? If you which is crazy. Every woman had a still at home. Every woman knew how to distill, because if you wanted to drink water, in order to drink water that wasn't going to get you sick, you had to put in some, some distilled spirits. And in the US, that was whiskey, because we had grains readily available. And seeing how the evolution of that then went to women pushing for prohibition in the US and the temperance movement, how it's just like been them the entire way. That's super cool, and stuff that you don't think about. Again, you don't see women in the whiskey industry all that often. So yeah, thinking of how big of a role we've had throughout history is insane. So yeah, that's been really cool.
This has been so great. Like I said, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you for making time to chat with me and catch up with me.
This is fabulous.